In the quiet hours of the night, when the world has gone still and the only sound is the gentle tick of a clock, there exists a particular kind of magic. It lives in small things, in a pressed flower kept between the pages of a book, in a ribbon saved from a gift long ago, in the soft melody of a music box playing in the darkness. These small things hold the largest feelings, the hopes we dare not speak aloud, the tenderness we keep hidden, the love that blooms in secret. This is the story of such a love and the music box that held it safe. Come in, dear visitor. Come in from the cold. I see you've noticed the snow falling past the window. It reminds me of a winter long ago, in a great house in Hampshire. Here, warm yourself by the fire while I show you something special. I found it just yesterday, tucked away in a box of forgotten things from an estate sale. Look, a music box. Feel how it fits in your palm. Rosewood, I believe, with mother-of-pearl inlay. See how the light catches it? Someone took great care in making this. And inside, burgundy velvet, still soft after all these years. But wait, there's something more. Do you see it there, in the corner of the lining? A small violet pressed flat and faded to pale lavender. Someone placed it there deliberately, to be found by whom? The one who gave this box, or the one who received it? Let me wind the mechanism. Listen, a waltz. Gentle, isn't it? The kind of melody that makes you want to sway, to close your eyes, to remember. This music box belonged to a young woman named Clara Whitfield. She was a governess in a fine house in the winter of 1887. And though she was meant to be invisible, to exist in that strange space between servant and family, she was seen. Seen by the one person who should never have noticed her at all. Let me tell you her story. The morning came grey and cold to Ashworth Hall, as mornings did in late November. Clara Whitfield woke before the light, as was her habit, in the small room at the top of the house that had been hers for nearly 2 years. The room was plain but comfortable. A narrow bed with the quilt her mother had made, a washstand with a chipped basin, a small writing desk beneath the window, and a wardrobe that held everything she owned. Which was not much. She rose and washed her face with water from the pitcher, gasping at its coldness. The fire in her grate had burned down to embers overnight, and she could see her breath in the chill air. Quickly she dressed, a grey wool dress, practical and modest, with a white collar and cuffs that she laundered herself each week. Her hair she pinned up neatly, the dark brown waves tamed into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. Clara Whitfield was 28 years old. By the standards of her time, she was a spinster, a woman whose chance for marriage had passed. She had been the daughter of a respectable clergyman, educated enough to teach, but left with nothing when her father died and the living passed to another man. No family to take her in, no dowry to attract a husband. So she had done what women of her situation did. She had become a governess. It was a strange existence, being a governess. She was educated, refined, a gentleman's daughter, yet she worked for her living. She was not a servant. She did not scrub floors or empty chamber pots. Yet she was not family either. She existed in the space between, belonging nowhere and to no one. It was lonely, this life. But Clara had grown used to loneliness. She had made her peace with it, or so she told herself. She breakfasted alone in the small room adjoining the nursery, as was proper. A governess did not eat with the servants in the kitchen. She was too educated, too refined for that. But neither did she eat with the family. She was, after all, an employee. So Clara sat alone with her tea and toast, watching the pale winter light creep across the table, and thought about the day ahead. At 8 o'clock precisely, she entered the schoolroom to find her pupils already waiting. Charlotte, 8 years old, sat primly at her desk, her blonde hair neatly braided, her slate and chalk arranged before her. James, 6, was less composed. He was attempting to balance his pencil on his nose and giggling when it fell. "Good morning, children." Clara kept her voice warm but firm. She had learned, in her years of teaching, that children responded best to consistency, kindness without weakness, structure without coldness. "Good morning, Miss Whitfield." Charlotte's response was proper, practiced. James merely grinned and dropped his pencil one final time before sitting up straight. These children were her world now. Charlotte, with her quiet intelligence and hunger for stories, who reminded Clara of herself at that age. James, all energy and mischief, who would leave for boarding school next autumn and already seemed to sense that his time in the nursery was ending. They were not her children. They never would be. But she loved them nonetheless. In 2 years, she had become something to them. Not a mother. Their mother was gone, taken by fever the year before Clara arrived. Not quite a friend. The gap in their stations was too wide for that. But something, a steady presence, a safe harbour. The morning passed in lessons, reading first. Charlotte was progressing through a book of improving tales, while James struggled gamely with his primer. Then arithmetic, which Charlotte endured and James despised. Then French, at which both children were equally reluctant. Clara's own French was not perfect, but it was better than nothing, and a governess was expected to provide at least the basics. At 11 o'clock, they took a break for fresh air. Clara bundled the children into their coats and led them out to the garden for a brief walk. The air was sharp, smelling of coming snow, and the children's breath puffed white as they ran ahead of her along the gravel paths. Clara walked more slowly, savouring the cold on her cheeks, the crunch of frozen grass beneath her boots. It was on this walk that she first saw him watching. Edward Ashworth stood at his study window, a dark figure behind the glass. Clara could not see his face clearly, but she felt his gaze on her and the children, running and laughing in the winter garden. She did not wave or acknowledge him. It would have been improper. But she was aware of him, aware of being watched, and something in her chest fluttered like a bird testing its wings. By midday, the children were restless, and Clara released them for their dinner in the nursery with their nurse, an elderly woman named Mrs. Blunt, who had been with the family since Mr. Ashworth himself was a boy. Clara took her own meal alone, as always, and then spent an hour mending a tear in Charlotte's pinafore and reading a few pages of the novel she kept hidden in her desk drawer. A governess was supposed to improve her mind with serious works, but Clara found she could not resist a good story. It was during the afternoon drawing lesson that he appeared. Edward Ashworth entered the schoolroom without warning, his tall frame filling the doorway before Clara had even registered the sound of his footsteps. She rose immediately, as was proper, and felt her cheeks warm despite herself. "Mr. Ashworth." She dropped a small curtsy. "We were not expecting you. Papa." James launched himself from his chair and attached himself to his father's leg like a limpet. Charlotte, more restrained, merely smiled and set down her pencil. Edward Ashworth was 36 years old, a widower of 3 years, master of Ashworth Hall and all its lands. He was tall and lean, with dark hair touched with early grey at the temples and eyes the colour of strong tea. His face was not handsome in the classical sense. His features were too sharp, his expression too guarded, but there was something compelling about him nonetheless, a depth, a weight, a sense that behind his silence, oceans moved. "I came to see my children's progress room," he said, and his voice was low and measured, the voice of a man who chose his words carefully. "I hope I am not interrupting, Miss Whitfield." "Not at all, sir. We were practicing drawing. Charlotte, perhaps you would like to show your father your work." Charlotte held up her sketchbook shyly, revealing a passable rendering of the vase of dried flowers that sat on the windowsill. Edward examined it with serious attention, as if it were a masterwork in a gallery rather than a child's effort. "Excellent work, Charlotte. You have captured the light quite well." He turned to James. "And you, young man, what have you drawn?" James presented his own paper with considerably more enthusiasm. It appeared to be a horse, though it might also have been a large dog, or possibly a very strange cat. "It's a dragon," James announced. "He breathes fire and eats villains." Edward's lips twitched, the closest he ever came to a smile Clara had noticed. A fearsome creature indeed. "You must tell me more about him sometime." He straightened then, and for just a moment his eyes met Clara's. It was brief, a fraction of a second, but she felt it like a touch. Something flickered in his gaze. Recognition? Curiosity? She could not name it, and then it was gone, and he was looking at the children again. "I will leave you to your lessons. Miss Whitfield." He nodded to her. "Thank you for your care of them." "It is my pleasure, sir." And then he was gone, his footsteps receding down the corridor, and Clara was left with her heart beating strangely fast and a feeling she could not explain. That evening, Clara sat in the library. It was one of her few permitted indulgences. Mr. Ashworth had told her, when she first arrived, that she was welcome to borrow any book she wished. The library was a grand room, lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes, and Clara loved it with a passion she rarely allowed herself to feel. Here, surrounded by words and ideas, she could forget for a moment that she was nobody. that she had nothing, that her life would be a series of other people's houses, other people's children, until she grew too old to work and was cast out to what? She tried not to think about that. She was curled in a chair by the fire, absorbed in a novel, when she heard the door open. She looked up, expecting a servant come to tend the fire, and found Edward Ashworth instead. "Miss Whitfield." He stopped just inside the doorway, as if surprised to find her there. "Forgive me. I did not know the room was occupied. Please, sir, do not leave on my account." Clara rose, clutching her book. "I was only borrowing. You said I might—" "Yes, of course. I meant what I said." He moved into the room, and Clara noticed he carried a glass of brandy in one hand. "Please sit. Continue your reading." She hesitated, uncertain of the propriety, but he had already settled into the chair across from hers, stretching his long legs toward the fire. To leave now would be awkward. So she sat, though she could no longer concentrate on the words before her. "What are you reading?" he asked after a moment. She showed him the spine, bracing for disapproval. It was a sensation novel, not the sort of serious literature a governess should favour. But he merely nodded. "I read that one last year. The ending is unexpected." "Please don't tell me." The words escaped before she could stop them, and she immediately regretted her forwardness. But he only smiled, actually smiled, a small curving of his lips that transformed his stern face into something almost warm. "I would not dream of it." They sat in silence then, but it was not uncomfortable. The fire crackled. Outside, wind pressed against the windows. Clara pretended to read, but she was aware of him with every fibre of her being. The way he held his glass, the way the firelight caught the silver in his hair, the way his breathing slowed as the brandy did its work. "Miss Whitfield." His voice broke the quiet. "May I ask you something?" "Of course, sir." "Are you content here, at Ashworth Hall?" The question surprised her. Employers did not usually ask after the happiness of their governesses. "I am, sir. Very content." "The children speak of you often, Charlotte especially. She says you tell her stories, stories you invent yourself." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I hope that is not improper. I know a governess should focus on established texts. It is not improper at all. Charlotte has smiled more in the past 2 years than in the year before you came." He paused, and his eyes found hers across the space between them. "I wanted to thank you for that." "There is no need, sir. I love them, the children. I know." His voice was soft now, soft as the falling snow outside. "I can see it in how you are with them. It is rare to find someone who truly cares." Clara did not know what to say. The moment felt fragile, like spun glass, like something that might shatter if she breathed too hard. So she said nothing, and neither did he, and they sat together in the firelight until the clock struck 9, and she rose to return to her room. "Good night, Mr. Ashworth." "Good night, Miss Whitfield." She felt his eyes on her as she walked to the door. She did not look back. The days shortened as December approached, and Clara found herself living for those stolen moments, a chance encounter in the corridor, a brief conversation over the children's heads. An evening in the library when he happened to appear. They never spoke of anything important, books mostly, or the children, or the weather. But beneath the ordinary words, something else was building, something neither of them named. One afternoon, she took the children to the conservatory for their nature lesson. The glass house was warm, despite the cold outside, heated by pipes that ran beneath the floor and filled with plants that should not have survived an English winter. Orange trees heavy with fruit, jasmine climbing the walls, and in one corner, beneath the palest light, a cluster of violets, small and purple and impossibly delicate. Clara knelt before them, showing the children how to identify the heart-shaped leaves, the 5-petaled flowers. James was more interested in a beetle he had found on the flagstones, but Charlotte leaned close, breathing in the faint sweet scent. "They're beautiful," Charlotte whispered. "Why do they grow in winter?" "Because someone tends them carefully," Clara said. "They need warmth and attention to bloom when everything else is sleeping." She did not know that he was there, did not know that Edward Ashworth had entered the conservatory behind them, that he stood in the doorway watching as she knelt among the violets with his daughter. She did not know that he heard every word she said, but she would remember this moment later. She would remember the violets and the warmth and the way Charlotte's hand had slipped into hers. She would remember and she would understand. Clara knew she was being foolish. She was a governess. He was the master of the house. The gap between them was vast and unbridgeable. Even if he felt something for her, and she was not certain he did, nothing could come of it. Society would never permit it. His family would never permit it. She would be dismissed in disgrace, her reputation ruined, her future destroyed. And yet she could not stop the quickening of her heart when she heard his step in the hall. Could not stop the way her breath caught when their eyes met. Could not stop the dreams that came to her at night, in her narrow bed in her small room, dreams she would never speak aloud. On the evening of December 23rd, the house was transformed. Garlands of holly and ivy draped the banisters. A great tree stood in the entrance hall, decorated with candles and ribbons. The servants sang carols in the kitchen, their voices drifting up through the floorboards. The children were wild with excitement, and even Mrs. Blunt's stern demeanour softened at the sight of their joy. Clara helped Charlotte and James hang their stockings by the nursery fire, then settled them into bed with promises of wonders to come in the morning. Charlotte asked for a story, and Clara obliged. A tale of a princess in a tower, waiting for someone to see her, truly see her, and set her free. By the time she finished, both children were asleep, their faces peaceful in the candlelight. She returned to her room and prepared for bed, but sleep would not come. She lay awake, listening to the old house settle around her, thinking of him, of his rare smiles, of the way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, of the impossibility of everything she felt. It was nearly midnight when she heard something at her door, a soft sound, like something being set down. She waited, heart pounding, until the footsteps retreated. Then she rose, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and opened the door. On the threshold sat a small box, wrapped in paper the colour of cream. Her hands trembled as she picked it up and brought it inside. There was no card, no note, no indication of who had left it, but somehow she knew. She sat on her bed and unwrapped the paper carefully, preserving each fold. Inside was a box of rosewood, inlaid with mother-of-pearl in a pattern of stars and moons. She opened it, and a melody began to play. A waltz, gentle and sweet, the kind of tune that spoke of ballrooms and candlelight, of hands clasped and hearts beating close. Clara listened until the mechanism wound down, then wound it again and again, letting the music fill her small cold room until it felt like a palace. And there, nested in the burgundy velvet lining, was a single violet, pressed and dried, but still recognizable. Violets from the conservatory at Ashworth Hall. She had admired them once, in passing, not knowing that anyone had heard. He had heard. He had remembered. He had given her this. She held the music box to her chest and wept, not from sadness, but from something too large to name. Joy, perhaps, or hope, or the terrifying, wonderful knowledge that she was not alone in what she felt. For a long time, she simply sat there in the darkness, the music box cradled against her heart. The candle burned low. Outside her window, snow began to fall, soft and silent, covering the world in white. And Clara listened to the waltz play over and over, thinking of the man who had left this gift at her door, and wondering what it meant that he had chosen to give her music. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold. Clara went through the motions, watching the children open their gifts, helping Mrs. Blunt serve the holiday breakfast in the nursery, accepting with grace the small token Mr. Ashworth gave all his servants, a length of ribbon for her, practical and impersonal. She did not look at him differently, did not give any sign, but she felt the weight of the music box hidden in her pocket, and she knew that he knew she had received it. That evening, she saw him in the corridor outside the library. The children were in bed, the house quiet. They stood for a moment in the half-dark, neither speaking. Then Clara reached into her pocket and withdrew the music box. She opened it, just enough for the melody to escape, a few soft notes that hung in the air between them. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Thank you," she whispered. He did not answer, but his hand rose, almost of its own accord, and touched her cheek, the lightest brush of his fingers, there and gone. Then he turned and walked away, and she was left standing alone with the music still playing in her palm. The days after Christmas passed in a haze. They did not speak of what had happened, but something had shifted between them, something that could not be undone. When they encountered each other now, there was a new awareness, a current running beneath the surface of their ordinary words. One afternoon, Clara was walking in the winter garden with the children when she saw him approaching along the path. Charlotte and James ran to greet him, and for a few minutes They all walked together, the children between them, chattering about snowmen and sledding and the robin they had seen on the fence post. When the children ran ahead to investigate something in the hedge, Edward fell into step beside her. They walked in silence for a moment, their breath misting in the cold air. "The children are happy," he said at last. "They are, sir. The holiday season agrees with them. It agrees with you too, I think." He glanced at her sidelong. "You seem lighter than before." Clara felt her cheeks warm despite the cold. "I suppose I am, sir." "I am glad." His voice was quiet. "I would not want you to be unhappy here." She did not know what to say. They walked on in silence, following the children through the frozen garden, and Clara thought that this simple walking, this quiet companionship, was more precious than any grand declaration could ever be. On New Year's Eve, he found her in the library again. The children were asleep, the servants occupied with their own celebrations, the house quiet. He sat in his usual chair, and she in hers, and for a long while they simply existed in the same space. "Miss Whitfield," his voice was rough. "Clara." She startled at the sound of her name. He had never used it before. "I should not be here, Gut," he said. "I know what this is, what it looks like, what people would say. I know it too, and yet I cannot stay away." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his head bowed. "You have become necessary to me, in ways I did not expect, in ways I cannot explain." "You do not have to explain." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I feel it too." He looked up at her then, and in his eyes she saw everything she felt reflected back. The longing, the fear, the impossible, undeniable hope. "I do not know what will happen," he said. "I cannot promise you anything. The world is not kind to people like us. I know, but I needed you to know that you are seen, that you matter, that you are not invisible to me." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. To be seen. It was all she had ever wanted. All anyone ever wanted, perhaps. "The music box," she said. "The violet. You admired them. In the conservatory. Last spring. You knelt among them with Charlotte, and you said they needed warmth and attention to bloom. You were there. I was there. I am always watching, Clara, even when you do not know it." The clock struck midnight. Somewhere in the house, servants were raising glasses to the new year. But here, in this room, there was only the two of them, and the fire, and the silence that held more than any words could say. He rose from his chair and crossed to hers, knelt before her, taking her hands in his. They were warm, his hands, strong. The hands of a man who had held reins and pens and the weight of his responsibilities all his life. "I cannot offer you what you deserve," he said. "Not yet. There are things I must arrange, people I must consider. My sister, the children, the expectations of our world. But if you can wait, I can wait. If you can trust that there will be a time, I trust you. He raised her hands to his lips and kissed them. First one, then the other, a promise, a vow. Then he released her and stood and walked to the door. Until spring, he said. Can you wait until spring? I can wait forever if I must. He smiled then, a real smile, full and warm, transforming his face into something beautiful. You will not have to. I swear it. And then he was gone. That night, Clara returned to her small room at the top of the house. She wound the music box and let it play, the gentle waltz filling the darkness. She thought of spring, of what might come, of the impossible, wonderful possibility that her story was not over after all. She opened the velvet lining and tucked inside a small piece of paper, folded tight. On it, she had written 2 words, I wait. Then she closed the box, held it to her heart, and smiled. Outside her window, the snow had stopped falling, and the first stars of the new year were appearing in the clearing sky. Somewhere below, she heard the faint sound of laughter, the household greeting 1888 with hope and good cheer, and Clara Whitfield, governess, spinster, nobody. Clara Whitfield smiled in the darkness and waited for spring. And so Clara Whitfield's music box found its way here, to my little shop, after all these years. What happened to Clara? What happened when spring came? I wish I could tell you that I know for certain, but some stories keep their endings secret. What I can tell you is this. The box was found in an attic in Hampshire, among the belongings of a Mrs. Clara Ashworth. Yes, Ashworth. Whether she was wife or widow when she died, I cannot say. Whether her spring came or not, the music box cannot tell me. But the violet is still there, pressed into the velvet, and someone had added to it over the years. A snippet of lace, a lock of dark hair tied with ribbon, a wedding ring worn thin with years of wearing, a folded note whose words have faded beyond reading. Someone loved this box. Someone kept it close for many years, adding to its treasures, winding its melody, listening to its waltz in the quiet hours of the night. And that, perhaps, is story enough. We think of love sometimes as a grand thing, all passion and declaration and dramatic gestures. But the truest love, I think, is quieter than that. It is a music box left at a door, a violet remembered from a passing comment, a promise made in firelight to wait, to hope, to believe. The next time you hear a melody that makes your heart ache, perhaps you might think of Clara. Think of her small room at the top of a great house. Think of her careful hope, her patient trust, her willingness to believe that she deserved to be seen. And know that somewhere, in the vast and tender mystery of time, her music is still playing. Now then, it's getting late, and you must be tired. The snow is falling faster now, and the fire is burning low. This old shop will be here whenever you need it, whenever you want to slip away from the world for a while and listen to the stories that old things have to tell. Rest well, dear visitor. Rest well. The music box goes back on its shelf now, where it can dream of waltzes and violets and love that waits for spring.